Thank you so much. We're happy to be presenting with you today and look forward to a lively discussion around a very interesting topic that seems to be quite the buzz in the marketplace today. Just a couple quick words on TalentWave. TalentWave is a 19-year-old company formed from the merger of Synergy Services and Icon Professional Services. We are specialists in enabling the world of independent work. That's where our passion lies, and as we deliver and build improvements to our products and services, you'll see them work to really elongate the relationship between independent workers and the companies they want to work with. I think we're going to start with a polling question, and as we put this in here, I thought I'd share with you one of the unique trends we're seeing in the marketplace is that if you look back 10 years ago or so, companies very rarely directly source their own project-based workers or contingent workers, and we have seen that steadily on the rise. As companies spend more time, money, and effort on things like employer branding and worker selection criteria, you start to see an increase in this concept of directly sourcing not only your FTE population, but your contingent population. So for our first polling question, I'd like to ask the group, do you currently source your contingent workers, lumped in as independent contractors, freelancers, temps, SOW workers, directly?
Hey folks, remember that polling widget is right there to the left of the screen. It just takes one simple click to log your answers, either yes or no to this polling question. So we'll give all of you just a couple minutes to get your responses recorded, and we'll turn back to the TalentWave team for their thoughts.
We'll go ahead and keep moving through the content while we're watching this poll. It looks like, well, actually, early returns there, that's pretty impressive. Split 83%. Say there is some amount of recruitment of contingent labor. Our hypothesis, and certainly the trends we've seen over the last several years, would speculate that this will continue to rise. Not only cost reasons will drive this, but workers will drive this, and just the enablement that independent or project-based workers and the work they do has really made this possible in a way that it didn't exist before. So let's start our discussion today with just putting a framework around the size of this population. This is from a 2016 Staffing Industry Analyst census of the contingent workforce. I find the numbers to be quite shocking for folks who haven't been very close to this population size. But the total U.S. contingent workforce, made up of temps, project-based workers, independent contractors, consultants, and some interesting growth in a segment that many of us are calling gig workers, makes up a total of 51 million. That is a huge number and a huge amount of growth, certainly the fastest growing worker segment in the U.S. If you look in terms of dollars, how that plays out, $493 billion annually spent, and that's a 2015 number, so that number will be going up once we see the next year's data, and about $160 billion of that spent on ICs. The interesting thing about that $160 billion number is, from our estimation, that's a low number. This is still a population that, for many companies, remains hidden, difficult to find, difficult to see, and often classified under a variety of worker types, including broader SOW relationships, occasionally understaffing contracts. And so getting to that exact number makes it a difficult one, but it's a safe bet to assume that the numbers you're seeing here, both in number of workers and amount of dollars, are both conservative. This next discussion point is around the overall shifting of workers and the workplace, but I kind of think of it as a reflection of the overall change in our world. As parents of teenagers, I certainly have seen the way my children approach work, what they want to do, how they want to do it, how they prioritize what they want to do shift, and I'm sure many of you have as well. But to think about this properly, think about the differences between, and let's maybe even go back 20 years or so, the differences between the way workers engaged with their workplaces. Very often workers wanted to be employees, paid a salary, stay for many years, work in an office environment, build those long-term relationships. The job was very much an identity driving part of someone's world. Everything around someone's career was about picking the right company that would offer me the opportunity to grow in that career, potentially even inside that single company up to a certain spot. Now, when you look at millennials and all of the generations past, it's amazing to see the shift in worker preferences. One of the things, and we don't have it here on this slide, but I've spoken a lot on the millennial topic, and one of the drivers of millennial work is what you hear referred to as purpose-driven work. And a lot of these themes that you'll see on the right-hand side under the now column start to really play that out. I want to work on flexible, interesting, meaningful projects to me. And that means that if the project and the work moves from company to company, so will I. I'm perfectly fine signing up for accountability for the performance of the work that I do, expecting that if there's some upside there, I can celebrate in that. Work hours are no longer, and again, this is a big offshoot of technology, work hours, where you work, and the tools you use to work have changed entirely. There's no longer a need necessarily for an office. There's not a need to log into a mainframe. Some of you on this webinar may be too young to even know what that is. But that has really enabled an entirely different makeup of worker. Whereas it used to be how high can I get, what's my title? Freedom now trumps title for a lot of younger workers. And things like work-life balance become a huge driver for how people select their work home. So this is, I don't plan to run through each of these worker types, but I think it's a very interesting pictorial of the talent continuum. And what jumps out at you right away is just how many more kinds of flexible engagements there are versus the traditional FTE. Everything from temporaries to freelancers, ICs, and consulting, but there are many more that get lumped into these broader categories, like things like alumni, interns, all kinds of worker types whereby the work itself is either finite in duration, finite in scope, or the worker themselves only wants to be engaged for a period of time. The way that workers are paid varies drastically, and the engagement model varies with it. The important message here, when I think about the companies that we talk to every day, is the process whereby a company can use every one of these worker types as part of a broader talent strategy. There should no longer be a strategy that is one column deep or even two columns deep. Most companies that are using talent as a core differentiator and a core growth mechanism in their strategic plans have learned and adopted ways to engage all these worker types effectively.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. This is Kimball. I'm going to pick up from here. So just to cap off that last slide, it really speaks to a movement that we see growing a lot out in the industry right now, that the concept of total talent management and just really looking at the workforce very holistically in terms of more of what is the work that needs to get done, and then let's figure out the best resource or the best worker category to do that specific work. This next slide gets into a little more kind of statistical data around some of the view towards this new world of work. The study here was a group of Stanford and Y Combinator, which is basically a startup incubator alumni, that did some research around people's view of freelancing, and we use that word fairly synonymously with just independent workers. So these are folks that are working on their own in various capacities, but they found that more and more workers are doing this kind of work and this style of work, working independently, and 38% of millennials are working this way today. And one thing we've seen with many of our enterprise clients is more and more baby boomers as well. So I think the last stat I saw was about 5,000 baby boomers per day are exiting the workforce. And by reference, baby boomers are those that were born between the years of 1946 and 1964. So 5,000 a day are exiting the workforce as FTE employees of a company. But many of them, by virtue of either their career aspirations or being bored or financial reasons, are wanting to continue earning income. A lot of them are choosing to come back as independent workers. I think over the next few years we're going to see a lot of interesting stats in terms of the percentage of baby boomers re-entering the workforce as freelancers or as independent workers. The other stats here that are interesting are 39% of workers are very satisfied with their decision as independent. Many of these compared to FTE roles, right? So being independent, as Teresa mentioned earlier, really gives you a sense of freedom, career choice, and work choice. Most of these workers, 60%, are actually freelancing by choice. In other words, they weren't laid off and then forced to find income, but they actually have made the decision to be independent, and this is their career path of choice moving forward. In fact, half of those surveyed said that they wouldn't stop working as a freelancer for any amount of money, which is a very dramatic result and something that I think is going to continue to grow in scope. The other dynamic behind this incredible growth, the backdrop to the incredible growth of the independent workforce is on the buy side. More and more companies are really facing a very real dynamic of talent scarcity. In fact, 64%, and this was actually from a McKinsey study, 64% of companies report having positions that they cannot fill due to talent scarcity, particularly amongst skilled knowledge workers. Oftentimes, these kind of roles are referred to as STEM, for science, technology, engineering, math types. So these are highly quantitative types of work, and more companies are struggling to find those kind of workers. So the interesting counterbalance here is, as more workers are choosing to become independent, more companies are struggling to find skilled positions. So the marriage of those two, how they meet in the middle, is really the focal point of our conversation today, around building a talent community and helping to foster that supply and demand of scarce talent. So as we move forward in the presentation, we'll be talking more specifically about that. Now, having said that, the independent workforce brings with it both risk and reward. We've talked quite a bit about the benefits of this talent, both to the worker and to the buyer of the talent, to the enterprise. With that also comes risk. Many federal and state agencies are very concerned around proper worker classification. It impacts everything from workers' compensation insurance to unemployment to ACA, EEOC. There's lots of federal and state statutes and regulations that are all predicated upon proper worker classification, and that includes the minor issue of tax collection, right? So the quote here from David Wheel, the DOL, the leader of the DOL's wage and hour division, I find very telling. They are very focused on worker classification, but they also have a stance that it's not inherently illegal to classify someone as an independent contractor. The caveat here, and again, this is from the enterprise side, the caveat is you have to do it correctly. And that's where a company like TalentWave, we spend most of our days helping companies engage independent workers safely and cost effectively, and with that reward comes the risk, right? So the risk typically led by tax collection, but also all the other wage and hour and worker protections that come with proper worker classification. We've got a stat up here, so the IRS and the DOL and state agencies continue to ramp up their enforcement, and the broadest estimate we found is that 46% of U.S. workers are misclassified in some form. That's a very, very big number. We've talked quite a bit about the growth of the independent workforce. Today, Teresa flashed the stat earlier, 51 million. That comprises roughly 35% of the U.S. workforce is a non-employee, independent worker. Many estimates, there's a number of people studying this, both private sector as well as government agencies. Many estimates are that this could reach 50% of the U.S. workforce sometime in the next decade, sometime mid-2020s. That could be a very real number, which is very significant. We talked earlier about total talent management. When you look at your whole workforce and you begin to realize that perhaps half of them are not your employee, that becomes a very significant strategic consideration in terms of how do you attract them, how do you retain them, how do you engage them, how do you keep them loyal to you as a client of choice versus anywhere else they may go as an independent worker. So it's time for another polling question. Getting a little more specific this time. So many people we discovered in the first polling question, the vast majority, I think 86% was the last number I saw flash up there. 86% are direct sourcing folks, independent workers. So of those workers that you're finding on your own, how many are you re-engaging as they wrap up a project? So in other words, do you re-engage workers that have successfully performed for you in the past? We think this might be a very interesting question to ask as we lead into more specifics around building a talent community.
Hi, HCI attendees. Go ahead and use that polling widget there on the left to log your responses. Looks like we have another vast majority so far. So what are your thoughts here, Kimball?
Are you able to refresh that so we can see it on our side here? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Actually, I'm not surprised. You would expect that as workers perform well, especially in larger organizations that have typically a preponderance of work to be done, and as we saw with the talent scarcity stat, not enough workers to do it. I would expect that once you have a worker that's performed well for you on a project or on some interim basis, and that project wraps up, you might try to find another piece of work for them to do. And this really becomes, and I'll talk more about this, but it becomes a fundamental thesis behind building a talent community. What do you do with these workers as you found them and you want to re-engage them? That's a very great stat. So perfect lead in to my next slide here. So once we've found these workers, they've performed well for us and on their project or on their interim basis, what do we do with them? The most common dynamic, and this happens all the time, is these workers they go away, right? They disappear with all of the knowledge and all the insights they've gained about your organization, all the experience they've gained at your expense. They just walk out the door at the end of the project. And isn't that a waste, right? What if we could find a way to tap into them and reutilize them? And it's not just independent workers. We're finding many companies are asking this same question about, wow, we've got a lot of intellectual knowledge that's retiring. As we talked about earlier, some of those are baby boomers that may still be young enough and have the desire to work, but just not on a full-time basis. What if we could bring them back on an independent or a contingent basis? The same goes for interns. Many companies are even asking these kind of questions about silver medalists, which are essentially the runner-ups in FTE searches. So, as they bring in 2 or 3 finalist candidates for a role, what do they do with the runner-up that may be perfectly suited for the company? The role just wasn't quite right. but perhaps they're interested in a project-based assignment for the client or for the company. All of these, I think, are considerations that more and more companies are asking now, and it leads into kind of the question of what do we do with them? So the next slide here asks a few leading questions, painting a picture of where we're headed with our discussion. You know, what if you did have a repository of these known workers that had the skills, you know, that had a track record, you have the reviews of them, and a picture into if they're available or even interested in working for you again? What if you knew they had performed well, and they were a cultural fit? You could actually answer the question that, yeah, they can do the work that we have here. And what if you knew they were pre-qualified and could start projects much faster and be kind of productive for your organization quickly? All of those are kind of leading questions into our vision for talent communities. So what is a talent community? One thing, it's interesting, we just had a discussion earlier today about this, and there's a lot of noise in the marketplace. I think there's a lot of competing visions around this. Probably in its simplest form, you know, our definition of a talent community is it's a web-based population, so it is in a sense a virtual community of known talent with specialized skills who are interested in working for you again. So, you know, our vision is it's not a big public marketplace of unknown workers, but these are people who are known to the organization and who the organization would like to use again in some capacity. So who are they? Again, we've talked about this a bit. You know, they could be independent contractors, consultants, freelancers, retirees, interns, and even the silver medalists that I just mentioned. But essentially, they're all independent workers that you'd like to use again and that are interested in working for your company again. Again, it has this topic, it's not new. You know, many organizations, especially those that have seasonal needs, like if you look at the retail industry, it's very common for them to have communities of workers that they can tap into on an ad hoc or need-based kind of time-based need. What we're discovering now is that the scope, the use case is expanding. You know, it's not just built around specific ad hoc needs. It's more just general. There's a population of workers that we want to get access to and that are much more independent than they have been in the past. So as we talk about it, you know, there's many different flavors. We're going to describe kind of our flavor, if you will, today, which is really a curated private community of known workers. You know, why haven't companies embraced them? I think large part, many companies haven't had the need. We talked a little bit about talent scarcity. As more and more companies face the dynamics of literally not being able to find enough capable workers to do the work at hand today, they're going to be forced, hopefully willingly, into exploring, you know, new avenues for finding and engaging talent, and we believe talent community is an avenue for that. Today we'll be talking about some of the considerations. You know, Karen's going to go into some of the more detail of kind of the operating mechanics behind a talent community. Should you be nervous? Is there risk? You know, my pat answer is you shouldn't be nervous. I think the only nervousness should be from excitement, just because there's a lot of opportunity here. And if you do it right, the risk can very much be managed. Much like any independent worker, as we talked about earlier, there is risk, but if you do it appropriately, the risk can very much be mitigated and managed. And that's where, you know, companies like Talent Wave can play a big role in helping you out. So this schematic at a really high level kind of describes our vision for what a talent community is. You can see in the middle there, it's essentially a place where you can build a community and where work and the worker can be identified and matched up and engaged. If you look at the little bubbles off to the side, you know, our vision is that we're less concerned about the categorization of the work and of the worker. So we don't really care. We're not going to discriminate within the talent community if the work is SOW-based or project-based, or whether it's just a temporary, hourly assignment. And by extension, we're also not very concerned about whether someone's a qualified independent contractor or they need to be an employee of somebody or payrolled. It's really about identifying independent workers and identifying work that's suitable for them, and then matching them up and putting them to work as quickly and safely and cost effectively as we can on behalf of the client. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Karen for our next polling question.
All right, thanks, Kimball. So yeah, our last polling question here for the day, now that we've talked a little bit about what our vision of a talent community is, we'd be curious to know, is your organization considering a talent community of your own? Have you given that any thought? And if so, when and what time frame? Okay. So I think, yeah, it shifted a little bit. So as I kind of digest that, I think, I'm not still moving a lot. It's hard to digest. I don't think I see anything, really surprising so far in those numbers. I'm really happy to see, actually, even the 22% looking at it in the next 6 months. I think as we kind of look at this, while there's a lot of buzz around this concept in general in the industry right now, it's still across the board pretty new. So we don't really expect to see yet a huge population who's been able to really give this a ton of thought. I think our hope is that, for this group of people coming out of this discussion, maybe that does become more of a topic of conversation for you within your organization and does become something that you start to think about in the nearer term. Okay. All right, so as Kimball mentioned, I'm going to dive a little bit more into how would this all work. Now that we've got kind of the high-level concept, what kind of goes into actually making this a reality? So if you look here, this is kind of our view of what it is and how it will actually work. We kind of break it down into 3 major components. One, you'll see on the top there is technology. You need some sort of system technology to be able to house the information, house the people, house the work, and be able to start making that matching a reality, and to be able to have the appropriate information to do that within that system. In the middle there, though, what Kimball likes to refer to as the magic in the middle is the services layer, right? So no matter how good that technology is, the services component of this is really the key to engaging these people, keeping them engaged, and actually getting them connected with the right work. So we kind of break that down into a few things. First, you have discovery, right? So this is the process of IDing those workers. Who's going to go into the community? What subset of your population are you focusing on? How do you start collecting that information and getting them in and getting through to enrollment, actually getting them into the system and actively engaged in the community? Getting their profiles updated, those sorts of things. And then there's curation, right? So this is kind of the really critical component from the way that we look at it. And it's how you encourage the interaction, right? The contractor's interaction with your community. You can do that through things like sharing open positions, right? So they can see what types of exciting opportunities are out there. Sharing information and updates about your company, right? Kind of on that thought line of being the client of choice, right? How do you get your name out there and really get people excited about your organization? Working with the worker to be engaged with their profile, keep it updated, those sorts of things. Keep their availability, their preferences updated so that we're really finding the best possible match. Monitoring licenses, certifications, right? Kind of having these folks ready to start their assignment very quickly by doing some of that legwork up front and having it housed and updated within that system. And then monitoring the end dates, right? Not having a gap if possible, so so that when we know folks are rolling off of assignment, whoever is there doing this curation, they're really actively monitoring and engaging those workers to ensure that they're potentially lining things up in terms of next opportunities. And then last in kind of that three-component model is the engagement. So to Kimball's point, it's not something that people should be scared of as long as you're doing it the right way. But in order to make this really effective and to not have that risk at the end of it, you do want the right engagement layer in place. Once you've identified those people, you've matched them to the work, you want to have a way to safely engage them, whether that's through an employer of record, an agency of record. You just want to make sure you're doing it the right way, and that you also have, as part of that, folks who are focused all the way through to offboard to re-engage these folks back into the community when they're done with that engagement. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the different approaches that you can take, right? I think there are several. We've certainly got some opinions about what we think might be the most effective, but there are lots of ways that you can look at this. So what you see here is kind of your typical managed workforce program, right? This is kind of a traditional model where you've got your program office, whether that's managed by an MSP or not, and typically has a VMS in place, where you're going to your traditional staffing vendors. You may do that in a tiered way, but you're generally sending the requisitions out to your staffing vendors. Where talent community can kind of fit into this, and you start to look at a different approach, we're seeing more and more clients want to manage their independent workforce in kind of the same manner, right? They want to fold it into the same type of program that is the traditional way. And there's a few different ways to do that. And I think it's challenging to think about sometimes with the independent workforce, because often these workers are what we kind of consider a company of one, and they don't typically come through your normal supply chain. But with a talent community, we can kind of position it almost as a vendor within that existing model so that it fits and tucks in very nicely into your existing contingent workforce program. So as I said, there's a few different approaches to this. The one that we kind of look at as potentially the most logical or the most progressive of those types of approaches would be to treat that talent community as what we consider a tier 0, right? So why not first look at your known community, folks that are in one way or another known to your organization. You know they can ramp quickly. You know they've done a good job for you before, especially in those highly skilled, really critical positions. So the concept there is you send that out first, look first in your internal talent community, see what you've got there. Ideally, you source it there, and again, you have the speed to ramp and the other benefits there, and we'll talk some more about those. And if you can't find it there, then you go out to your traditional tiering of staffing vendors. Another approach is kind of to structure it as a standalone talent supplier, right? So it kind of sits side by side with your existing program, and someone within your program office, again, that there are multiple ways to do that, will route the requisition to the right suppliers, right? So you may be going out simultaneously to your community and to your staffing vendors, but it's really its own standalone, acting as a vendor itself, sitting next to your existing program. And a third potential approach to this would be to treat it very similarly to how you would treat all of your other agencies. You kind of tuck it in as another agency within your group of suppliers. In that case, they're subject to all the same performance standards. You really just treat them as another supplier within that chain. Okay. So some things to think about and some, I guess, recommendations from us in terms of what you should be looking at in creating a successful talent community. One is when you look at that bench and the curation of that bench, we really encourage clients to first, start small. Focus on, one category, one business unit, somewhere that you can pretty confident that you can be really successful because it's a place where maybe you're already reusing people on a regular basis. where it's just primed, it's ready. Start there and then expand the program within your organization. You really want to kind of get it down, get it right, and then expand. The other is fostering that community. So again, I can't stress enough how critical it is to have someone, right? We consider it a talent agent, and a talent agent can take on many different forms, right? That could be an independent group. It could be you within your program office. It could be your MSP. There are lots of flavors there. But regardless of who that agent is, really putting a focus on how do you engage these workers, really foster a community environment, and really get these guys engaged, updating their profiles, actively looking at the work that's there, and really actively being engaged with what your organization, what your company is doing, not only as it specifically relates to them, but just in the general marketplace. Marrying the work to the worker, right? So really looking at how do we match the best talent with the work that you have, and putting a really strong focus on making that love connection, if you will. And then the last one is, and again, equally as critical to what I was talking about earlier, is really being prepared as those workers are coming off of their engagements and getting ready to disengage from whatever their existing project is, fostering the interest and the excitement to get back into the community and to continue to do work for your organization, even if it's within another area or under a different manager. And then just kind of in summary, right, when we talk about the benefits, right, why do this? So great, we've gone through the vision, kind of how you would put it into action, but why do it? We think it boils down to this short list, right? One, you get higher quality placements, right? You know they're tried and true, they're going to be high quality. Your time to fill is reduced. Again, you've got, they're ready, they're engaged, their certificates or certifications and licenses are up to date. They are ready to get in, get on site and start working. And their time to productivity is a lot shorter because in a lot of cases, they've been there before. They don't have the same ramp-up time just getting used to your organization and the type of work that someone from the outside would. Absolutely cost savings, right? So you're engaging this person as a known worker versus going out in the traditional model and paying staffing agency markups and rates. Efficiency, certainly. So again, if you have the right engagement layer, you have this down, right? It's a seamless process. You engage the person, you get them on board, they're paid, you roll them off back into your community. It's very, very efficient and repeatable process. And you've got the performance metrics, right? We can track how this is doing, how much of your talent you're re-engaging, and how successful that is in comparison to what you're getting through your traditional avenue. And lastly, a few other considerations just to think about, right? What are you trying to accomplish, right? Does it make sense for your organization to really be focused on that known talent? Is that a good avenue for your group? Are you looking to access new talent? Are you looking at more creative ways to go find talent that's maybe not as known to your organization? Again, the talent agent, really critical as you start really putting your model together, is who is going to act as that agent. It could be you, it could be an MSP, and it could be a service provider like Talent Wave who specializes in doing that. How will you engage the resources, right? Will they be part-time? Will they be full-time? Who's going to do that engagement layer, right? Once you've found these folks, once you know you want them, how are you going to engage them long-term? And then how is this going to work in with your existing program, your VMS and your MSP? Is it going to go the tier 0 model, or do one of those other approaches make more sense for your organization? All right. And that takes us, I think, just right at our time limit, and would love to answer any questions that you all have.
Absolutely. So before we get into questions, I want to thank all of you, Teresa, Kimball, and Karen, for being here to share your perspectives today. We're glad that you could share this information with us. We have had some questions come in over the course of the webcast, so we'll get to as many of those as we can here in the time we have left. HCI members, if you haven't yet submitted any questions for our presenters today, please do so now. You can enter your questions right there on the webcast page using that Q&A box. Just enter your question and your name right there, and we will get to it as soon as we can. So our first question here from the audience comes from Pat, and Pat asks, regarding what you've discussed today, it's great for technical skills such as IT projects. Can you address how applicable this might be to other industries, functions, etc.? Kimball, do you want to take a stab at that one first?
I'm happy to. Yeah, it's funny when we talk internally and with clients and prospects about talent community, it really is a unique conversation every time we have it. And I say that because every company has their own use case. As Karen mentioned, one of our tips for getting started is to really look at your company and kind of establish where's the pain, right? Where's the biggest problem that kind of the proverbial low-hanging fruit. So oftentimes it is focused around talent scarce roles, many of which do, to Pat's point, fall into IT kind of roles. But that's not always the case. I think every company has a unique population of workers that they either reuse frequently or that they have a hard time hanging on to, or that has unique knowledge or talents that they want to capture within a community and be able to re-engage. So our vision of a talent community is not limited in any way to one specific skill or functional area. Our technology, certainly looking at our own solution, and I think most in the market would answer this the same way, you can put people in different groups. So, some may have very technical skills that we want to capture and be able to search and reuse on, and whereas others may have other skills or functional expertise that we want to reuse. So it applies equally, I think, to any kind of independent worker that you may have within your organization.
And I think there are some pockets that are a really natural fit for it, right? I mean, we were talking earlier about you've got places, nursing, for example, in the medical world. It's a place where that's kind of naturally occurring, but not in a real organized way in a lot of cases. So there's some really niche areas too, where it's really primed and ready to be able to do this in a more efficient and effective way that's outside of that kind of IT world.
Great, thank you. And I'll direct this next question to you, Karen, since you were kind of talking about this a little bit towards the end here. Regarding the talent agent, this next question asks, who plays the role of the talent agent?
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned, it can be one of a number of different types of individuals, I guess. And again, we really strongly believe this is it depends on your specific environment and what will work best with your existing program and the vision for your future program. So it could be someone from the client side, so someone within your organization who owns kind of the program or is part of that program, who is actually working in there and playing all those different pieces of the talent agent, the curation, the enrollment, all those different things. It could be your MSP, so certainly somebody from the MSP program could be playing that role, or it could be a third-party independent, right? So someone like TalentWave who specializes in providing that service layer and that engagement layer.
Kimball, anything to add there?
I think those are the three buckets, and I keep coming back to you. Every talent community, I think, is going to have its own use case, much like every client organization, certainly every one of our clients, is very unique in terms of how they do business and their company and their culture, and even how they set up a contingent workforce program. So that answer is very situational, but in most cases, I think it's going to be either someone from the client, from the actual program office, or as Karen said, someone from the MSP, or someone that we provide as the talent community kind of provider.
Great, and I think with this next question here, I'll direct it back to you, Kimball, and then maybe Karen, you can chime in as well. You talked about every use case being a little different, so I think maybe that will apply here. But our next question, Kimball, is how do we populate our talent community?
That's a great question. So, I'll loop back to our recommendation that the place to start is with the low-hanging fruit, right? So really, this is a byproduct of kind of establishing why do you even want to build a talent community? What goals are you? What are your objectives? What problems are you trying to solve? When we have these conversations with clients and prospects, it typically very quickly leads us down a path of, look, we really have a problem within a specific group. It's generally very identified. So in terms of how do you build this, we again take the approach of crawl before you walk. Start with a very specific defined population, which could be geographic. It could be a specific functional area within the company, like finance or IT. It could even be a specific role, like project managers or IT developers, or whatever you find or have a hard time finding and you want to hang on to and re-engage. So at that point, when we start doing this discovery work with clients, we generally find the records of them in various places, right? We can go and look at AP records and find out, okay, who have you literally paid in the last year? We can look at 1099 records. Many managers have what I call a Rolodex, right? They have typically a spreadsheet of, hey, these are my go-to independent workers that I constantly find myself reusing. And as you start to aggregate that across the company, you very quickly begin to build a list that we can then, typically we either can import it into a talent community, or we can just send an invite to each of those workers to register and set up their profile within a community. So it generally follows kind of an organic approach like that. Again, looking for the highest need and then very quickly identifying those workers and getting them into the talent community. Anything to add, Karen, to that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that really covers it. It really is a combination of all of those things in order to get a substantial population into that community.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I think we have time for one more question from the audience here. So, Karen, if you want to take a stab at this one first, I think that would be great. This next question is, we all know and may have tried some engagement and re-engagement strategies, but could you provide us with some tangible examples?
So I want to make sure that I understand the question. So tangible examples of where we've been able to actually go re-engage.
Yeah, I think if you have any, success stories from your past, or even maybe some best practices on ways to re-engage folks that our webcast attendees could maybe try out in what they're working on today.
Sure. Yes, I think it's a few things. So, one, a lot of what Kimball just focused on, right, which is where we find that to be most successful is where you're very specific and targeted, at least initially on with the population, right? So we will look within our clients at the place that we can have the biggest impact and go from there. So that's one. I think in terms of tools for re-engaging, we touched on some of them, and we're continuously, quite honestly, working on improving and bettering the ways that we do this. But it's finding ways within, to get the word out about your company, right? So that the client themselves, to get them excited. It's reaching out to these workers, giving them kind of updates and keeping them aware of what the opportunities are out there, how successful their kind of counterparts are in filling positions, right? It's great to share statistics with how other folks are being re-engaged. I think too, it's in that whole management while they're on assignment, right? So really critical, what we found is focusing on these guys before they come off assignment, because I think once there's a break, it becomes really challenging, right? They're often looking outside of your organization for another opportunity. And in this case, right, you want to be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on the engagement, really working with them on what that next thing might be within your organization where there might be additional opportunity. And then really working with the managers and the clients for feedback on that individual and how that engagement was in terms of a match, so that we can either keep that going or improve it in other areas of of the organization.
I would add to that, when you implement a talent community, it's really core just to think through and really diagram out the whole life cycle, kind of the workflow, and really look at all the touch points. So, to Karen's point, obviously when somebody's on assignment and we know they're going to roll off at some point, begin to think about, hey, this is a worker that's really performing well. We'd like to use them again. What's that next project? And begin to almost tee it up before, almost make it a seamless transition from one project to the next. The other is, think of some of the other touch points, right? So I mentioned earlier the example of silver medalists. That's something that can be worked into your recruiting workflow. We have prospects now who are literally asking applicants for FTE roles if they would be interested in contract work, right? They're almost proactively populating a talent community before they've even made a decision on whether they're fit for the role they applied to. And I think as you look across your organization and all the different avenues you have for interacting with talent to do work, you can begin to identify those and kind of proactively think ahead of the ask about re-engagement, right? So the more you can map that out and have that in your workflow, then you can begin to capture them and have a discussion about the next project before they're even thinking of it themselves.
Excellent. Kimball and Karen, thank you so much for your participation in our Q&A today. We have reached the end of the hour, so we are going to wrap things up for now. I do, of course, want to express our appreciation again once more for our presenters today, Teresa Creech, Kimball Norup, and Karen Sawyer, and also to everyone at TalentWave for making this webcast possible. If you'd like to continue this discussion, you can do so on Twitter under the hashtag HCIChat. You can also take a look at upcoming HCI events by clicking the Attend a Conference link at the top of this page. And as usual, we'd like to thank all of our HCI members for attending our webcast today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to do so, and look forward to seeing all of you on another webcast soon. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.